Dr. John Bonnet.
Make some noise, everybody, for Dr. John Bonnet.
Wow, thank you guys. And I have to say, my fiance and I are from Gainesville, so that's probably where that got sort of infused into their vernacular. But anyway, this is the first time that we've actually made it down to the Southwest Florida Veg Fest, and this is awesome. Like, I wish I lived down here so I could come here every year and it was just in my backyard. But anyway, a big thank you to Mike Young and to all of the Veg Fest organizers here. Give them a round of applause, please. They've done a wonderful job putting this event together. So anyway, as you said, so my talk today, I don't know, are the slides up? I can't see the slides, but I don't know if they're available. Either way, my talk today is on a topic that's near and dear to my heart and something that I deal with every day with patients. My talk is called The Busy Illusion, How to Prioritize your health to optimize your life. So we're going to go through a couple of things. Hopefully they'll get the slides up and running, maybe. Are they on? Can anyone see the slides? No? Okay. All right, there we go. All right, and there's our title slide. Okay. So just a quick background about me, since I'm not as famous as James Aspey, and I can tell you as a presenter, the worst thing is to go out after somebody who everybody knows and loves. So anyway, I'm going to do my best today to give you something that I think is a nice take-home message. But anyway, I'm a sports and lifestyle medicine physician. My background is actually physiology and personal training, which I studied at Ohio State. I did my family medicine residency at Duke University in North Carolina before doing a one-year sports medicine fellowship at the University of Florida, which is how we ended up in Gainesville. And then I currently work at the VA, taking care of our veterans. And I'm working on finishing my master's in public health at Harvard this May. So, thank you for our veterans or whoever that was. But anyway, I've been very involved with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, which is something I'm incredibly passionate about. And so that's going to be sort of part of my talk today with you all. I take conflicts of interest very seriously because I think everyone out there has some idea or something to sell. And so I think it's good to know what sort of background I'm coming from and what sort of biases I might have. I recently co-authored a lifestyle medicine handbook, which is available on the internet, but this is some of the material for my talk today comes directly from there. So just a quick overview of the sort of 4 sections I'm going to cover. We're going to start initially with reviewing this idea of time and how we spend it. Then we're going to move quickly into this concept of busyness and what it really means. And then we're going to move to discussing priorities, where health fits in, and then we'll sort of finish with some take-home tips and tricks and things that you can do to sort of implement some of these things in your daily life. So we're going to start with time. Sorry, the clicker moved ahead. So I think it's very appropriate to start with time because time is honestly invaluable. It's probably the single most important commodity that we have, and it's something that no matter how wealthy you are, no matter how healthy you are, it's something you cannot buy more of and you cannot buy back, essentially. It's the one finite resource that we have, and it's honestly one of the challenges I deal with patients every single day, is that to do some of these healthy behaviors that we know are good for us and would improve our quality of life, one of the major obstacles that not only I face, but virtually everyone I talk to faces is the idea of not having time to do something. And so I think fundamentally it's important to recognize how important this is in our life, and more importantly, how we end up spending the time that we do have. Time is a very finite resource, obviously, and we all have different absolute amounts of time. But I think thinking about this concept of how much time we actually have in more finite, sort of granular pieces can give us a better sense for how we can sort of use the time that we do have most judiciously. And so just to do a little simple elementary school math, so let's take 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week. We multiply those together, we get 168 hours per week. That's how many hours of time all of us have, no matter where we live, no matter who we are. Now obviously, we don't get that 168 hours to do just whatever we want, whenever we want. Most of us have obligations of some sense. And just as a generic example, let's say most of us have to work a job. I certainly do. Some of us might be lucky enough to be retired, or might be young enough to not have to work at all yet. But for the most part, let's say for sake of example that we spend about 50 hours of our week doing our job, which that's a little generous for the 40-hour-a-week person, but I think most of us can empathize that a 40-hour-a-week job rarely is exactly 40 hours. There's typically other demands and things that go along with it. And obviously, you have to sleep. Sleep is the one thing, if you don't do, you will actually die if you do not sleep. So we all have to sleep, and let's say for, again, sake of example, that you're all getting the wonderful 8 hours of sleep every night. I'm certainly not always able to achieve that, but again, for the example, let's take away another 56 hours across that week. So that leaves us with 62 hours in our 160-hour week, where we sort of have some flexibility to choose what we want to do with that time. It may not sound like a lot, but it's still 40% of our week. So I think there's still plenty of time to work with to do the things that are important to us. But the other important question to ask is, so of that 62 hours, where does all that time go? What do we end up doing with our lives? Obviously, we all have things that are important to us, but what do we actually end up spending it on? And so to answer this question, I pulled some of the statistics from the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, and they actually have a very, very granular breakdown of how Americans report spending their time. So this is a pie chart here for those who can't see it as well. This is specifically looking at adults age greater than 15 who work full-time, and this is how their hour breakdown on a single workday typically looks. And so as you can see, most people report spending almost 9 hours working, and that includes commuting to and from work. They spend about 7.8, or let's round it to 8 hours sleeping. And again, this is reported data, so most people say that they probably sleep more than they actually do. But again, a good sort of sense of what some of these other categories are where our time gets eaten away at. So eating takes about 1.1 hours a day for anyone who is interested. Caring for others, that could be children, elderly, whomever that might be. And then the other big component of there is this leisure sort of slice, and that's 3.2 hours we spend doing leisure activities on a general day. They actually break down leisure a bit further into not only leisure, but how much time we spend watching TV. And as some of you may have read in some reports or things, people will actually report watching 2 hours of TV every single weekday. And then exercise is also in that leisure category, and it rounds out to about 12 to 15 minutes based on the breakdown. So this is some sense of what an average American reports how we spend our time. And so that moves us directly into this concept of feeling and being busy. Now the definition of being busy is just having a lot of things to do. And so by show of hands in the audience here, how many of you consider yourself a busy person? Yeah, a lot of people consider themselves very busy, and I'm certainly one of them. And I think it's interesting because almost all of my patients that I talk to about health and wellness and everything else, they are all busy. And this is all walks of life. No matter what your occupation is, no matter how much or how little money you make, or however big or small your family might be, the interesting thing is almost everyone who's not retired or not a child typically views their schedule as being filled with lots of things to do. And there's nothing wrong inherently with having lots of things to do, but I think it's also important to realize what are the things that we're doing, and do those actually reflect the things that are important to us in our lives. And so I'm going to tell you just a quick story here, and this was an example I sort of borrowed, but the concept is very appropriate. But it was essentially a study that was looking at all these really busy executive CEO women and saying, how do they spend their time? How do they maximize what they do to become as successful as they are? And as you might expect, their calendars are filled from starting at 5:30 or 6 a.m. until 7 p.m. at night, which is a tremendous amount of things in your schedule and certainly qualifies you as busy. And they were going through the example, and one of the ladies that was a part of this study, super busy CEO, had lots of plans, and when they were reviewing her records, they noticed on a Wednesday night, she had this huge time gap of 3 hours that said water heater. And when they explored it a little bit deeper, essentially this lady had scheduled plans when she came home from work to go out and to meet some colleagues for dinner and for some drinks and to sort of talk about some other business deal. Turns out that whole thing got usurped when she walked home into her utility room and found water all over her carpet floor with an actively leaking water heater. Needless to say, she didn't make it to dinner that night. And so all of a sudden, she spent 3 hours that night cleaning up water, calling in an emergency plumber to come in, fix her faucet, and then she proceeded to spend another 4 hours over the next 3 or 4 days calling in a carpenter, another plumber to install the correct part, and then talking with her insurance company. Lo and behold, she had spent 7 hours that week dealing with this thing that she probably had never even thought about the entire time she had lived at her house. Now, if you were to look at her schedule and you said, hey, can you find 7 hours this week to exercise, or 7 hours this week to make some healthy meals for you and your family, or can you even find 7 hours to mentor somebody? Chances are she would have said, I'm too busy for that. There's no way I could find 7 hours. But lo and behold, she walked home, she found this, and she found 7 hours. So I think this story can teach us a lot of things. Now, obviously, we aren't necessarily CEOs, and we all have different levels of responsibility. But one of the important things to take away from this is that time is very elastic, right? So she had this notion that her schedule was filled, but all of a sudden something that came up that was the most important thing at that moment, which was getting all the water out of her carpet and off of her floor. And so she decided that this thing all of a sudden was incredibly important, and time allowed for her to take care of that problem across those 7 hours. And the second point about that is that we are the arbiters of our time, right? Nobody else gets to choose what you do on a daily basis. We are the ones who are in charge. And so we get to choose how that schedule gets laid out. And knowing that we have the power to choose really gives us a lot of options in terms of what we want to do with it. And then lastly, priorities can change very quickly, as demonstrated by the example. Literally, one moment she was planning on going to dinner, the next moment she was spending the next 3 hours at her house cleaning up water. So they can change very quickly, and they can also change very slowly over time. Most of us have priorities and things that we think are important to us, but certainly what's important to you now is probably different than what was important to you 10 or 20 years ago, and will probably still be different from what's important to you 10 or 20 years from now. And so this leads to another really, I think, take-home message, and this is something I got out of a podcast, and someone said, if I could have a billboard and it could say anything, I would put busy is a decision. And initially, I was sort of taken aback by this because it's a fairly bold statement, because I consider myself a busy person. I don't necessarily feel like I have just chosen to be super busy. But if you take back and reflect a little bit, so in the example I provided with the CEO, she has all these things scheduled in her calendar that she is going to be a part of. Now, to some degree, she has made some choice in those efforts, whether it was taking that job that she has, or whether she was choosing to go to dinner with those people. These were all choices she got to make, and her schedule got filled with the things that she agreed to do. So I think this concept of busy being a decision is really powerful for us, because when we think about all these things that we have to do, then you can then take a step back and say, are these all things that I need to do, or even more importantly, things that I want to do? And so I think understanding this concept of busy can lead us to something that I actually call the busy challenge for people. And when we rethink what being busy actually means, I think you can use in place of, oh, I'm too busy for, you can literally name anything. I'm too busy to go to the movies. I'm too busy to make a healthy meal. I'm too busy to get enough sleep to get to bed on time. I'm too busy for whatever you want to fill in. But the reality is, we're not necessarily too busy for things. The reality when we use that statement is saying, whatever this activity is not a high enough priority to me right now. And I think this is a very fundamentally different way to think about it, because this is in fact what we are saying when we're too busy for something. It's not that things aren't important, it's just they're not important enough right now. To use the example again, the water heater was nowhere on this lady's probably top 1,000 to-do list of things, but all of a sudden, in an instant, it became the most important thing in that moment. And so all of a sudden it was a priority. And so we can use this across any sort of life structure or events or things that we might have. And I think an important thing with the busy is a decision, because I don't want it to come across as a condescending thing, because some people might say, well, what about the single mom who has 3 kids and is working 2 jobs? You know, what choice does she have? And I tend to agree with you that her choices are very limited. And in fact, the choices that we have are very much subordinate to the choices that we make are very subordinate to the choices that we have. And so, quite frankly, we all have very different levels of life, or levels of stress and different challenges that we face throughout. And so decisions aren't necessarily comparable between one person and the next, but the decisions that we do make, in the case of this single mom working 2 jobs, she has decided that taking care of her kids and providing them with a place to stay and food and all those things is her top priority, and she has done an incredible job of making sure that her life reflects those priorities. So anyway, this brings up that nice quote of, you'll never find time for anything. If you want time, you must make it. And I love this quote because I think it really tells the tale of how we sort of decide to spend our life and the time that we have here. If you find something tomorrow when you wake up and you think it's the best thing ever, you will invest tons of time into it. Conversely, if you find things that aren't really valuable or meaning for you, they become a drudge and a task and something that gets put off indefinitely. Now, one quick comment before I move to this idea of prioritization and sort of give you a global perspective for you to do sort of your own self-analysis of what indeed is important to you, is this idea of efficiency. So some people might say, maybe it's not that we don't have enough time, it's just we're not as efficient as we'd like to be doing certain tasks to fit everything in. And I can tell you, I love this idea of efficiency, and I fully ascribe to the power that it can give you. And for certain tasks, the things that are necessary, for example, doing laundry, cooking, cleaning, things that aren't necessarily things that are super important to you, but are sort of necessary for life, this is where I think efficiency can make the biggest dent and give you sort of small pockets of time. The challenge of being efficient, though, is that it still doesn't fix the problem of being busy. In fact, it makes the problem exponentially worse, because now you have figured out how to cram more things in that you don't care about that much into your already very busy life. And so if we make the mistake of becoming more efficient at the expense of not actually being purposeful about what we have decided to take on as tasks, we've really done ourselves a disservice. So with that, I think this really moves into the more important part of this talk, is not the idea that time is limited and finite and that most of us tend to be busy with things, but that the things that we are busy with are things that are important to us. And this brings us directly to what are our priorities in life. And so what should our priorities be, right? I'm not here to tell you what your priorities should be. I'm not some all-knowing, all-being, wonderful person. And as I said, priorities frequently change. But I think the idea is to think about what things are actually important to you. And this ranges everything from family to friends to health to everything that you can think of that you value in life, right? And we have our own list of these in our heads in a particular order. And if you hit the thing that is the most important to us, we will figure out a way to make that happen versus, priority to me of cleaning and dusting our blinds is so low on my list I don't really think about it. It's not that I can't do it, it's just that it's not a thing that is incredibly important to me at this present moment. And I think this is important because one aspect that people always tend to say is one of the most valuable things that they have, and is essentially saying is a priority to them, is their health, right? And I think all of us would agree that being healthy is a fundamentally important aspect of our lives, letting us do the things that we care about most. And so I think the challenge with health is that there's so many ways to sort of usurp that time or to draw us away from doing things that we know we would like to do or that we would want to do. And if you just think about it for yourself, how many times have we used that excuse in our head of saying, wow, I've just got so much going on, life's too busy right now for me to go to the gym today, or I got to finish this project or help my child with their school homework before they go to bed. I just don't have time to get to bed on time tonight, or make a healthy meal. As James Osby was saying, do we have time to go out and make the effort to sort of eat in the way that makes us feel good? And so all these things are things that we use this excuse of being busy to sort of give us a rationale of why we don't need to do it. And so again, the thing with the health is that we've known that for thousands of years, and in fact this is a quote from Hippocrates, but if we could give every individual the right amount of nourishment and exercise, not too little and not too much, we would have found the safest way to health. Now I think most of us, just by being at VegFest, fundamentally understand the importance of diet, and we've had talks all throughout the day today to demonstrate how fundamentally important nutrition is. My background in exercise, I would argue that exercise is also one of those critically important things that we can do right to get a ton of benefit in terms of our health. So anyway, knowing that sort of throughout our lives, our health will change, I sort of put this health continuum together, and this is sort of described at length in the handbook that we have, but essentially we all exist on this continuum, right? And so the far, far left, I've titled death, which none of us are dead right now, as far as I know anyway. And then all the far away to the right, we have this idea of optimal functioning, which probably most of us spend very small amounts of time feeling like we are actually at our absolute best, both physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, etc. And somewhere along the line, we put ourselves here. Now, the unfortunate part of life is that the general trajectory of this path is leftward, toward disease, toward death, towards all not great things. And the beauty, though, is that we have the ability to move along in both directions. And I'm here to make the case to you that lifestyle medicine, in particular, is one of the best ways that we can actually move ourselves toward the right in this graph. I think the modern medical world has gotten really good at slowing down how quickly we move to the left. If you have high blood pressure, we'll give you a pill. If you have high cholesterol, we'll give you a statin. And we've gotten really good at slowing the decline. We can keep you alive in the ICU for months, even years on life support, right? But I think most of us are not interested in just avoiding getting to the absolute left. I think we're much more excited about how much time we get to spend in the rightward portion of this graph. And that's where, and don't take my word for it, if you just look at the statistics of what things kill us, it becomes very apparent. So there's lots of graphs and lots of numbers here. You don't necessarily need to read all into them. The point being, the graph on the left in green has all of the top causes of death in the United States of 2000. And so no surprise, heart disease is at the top, #1 killer for sure. Cancer is a close second, and then stroke, and then a bunch of other maladies sort of come behind that. But the top three being heart disease, cancer, and stroke. All very modifiable diseases that we can think about. Now this paper was interesting because they said, well, these are the top causes of death, but although you theoretically wake up one day and you have a heart attack or you have a stroke, the reality is that a heart attack, cancer, even a stroke take years generally to develop. There's lots of changes that happen in your body, whether it's your cholesterol going up, your blood pressure, et cetera, that sort of actually cause the end event that we end up saying this was the cause of death. And so if you look on the right here, this is the actual leading causes of death. So the actual causes of heart disease, the actual causes of cancer, stroke, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look again, just looking at the top three, the first one is tobacco, so not smoking, and that's about almost 20%. Poor diet and physical activity, again, comes in a close second. And then third, alcohol consumption, and then the list goes on of other potentially modifiable behaviors as well. If you look at these actual causes of death, they were responsible for essentially 40% of the causes of death that we end up sort of putting down as your final diagnoses, and they're actually responsible for 80% of the preventable deaths that happen in our country today. And so again, I think this really underscores the importance of these lifestyle things, certainly on mortality and health, if nothing else. And I think it's a perfect segue into lifestyle medicine, which may be a new term for some of you. Hopefully some of you are aware of it. It is a new organization, sort of a new college that exists. This is the second day that they've actually had a board exam that physicians can take. But the concept behind it is using lifestyle behaviors rather than pills to treat patients' chronic disease. So rather than giving you a pill for your high blood pressure or doing a procedure, we focus on changing the things in your life that ultimately affect the disease that we're interested in. And it's not only preventing disease, which I think most of us are pretty aware of, at getting your exercise, eating a good diet to prevent heart disease, but lifestyle medicine takes it a step further and says not only can we prevent those things, we can actually use diet to treat disease. If you have diabetes, we can give you a diet that can actually treat to a large extent some of the ailments that you have. And in some cases, you can actually reverse disease. So someone who has been told that they are diabetic, all of a sudden changes their lifestyle, changes their diet, can reverse their hemoglobin A1C, which is sort of a measure of their average blood sugars, back into the normal range, right? And so that's powerful, right? And modern medicine does not typically reverse chronic disease. With acute diseases, arguably yes. But with chronic disease, we just give you pills to manage it indefinitely, right? But we don't actually get you ever back to being the healthy, disease-free person. We just get you back to being sort of under control, if you will. And so lifestyle medicine really comprises of 6 domains. And I'm not super smart, so an easy mnemonic and way to think of this is the big 3 that I think we most are familiar with. It's what we do with our feet, our fork, and our fingers. And what I mean by that, our feet is our physical activity, getting out and walking, which we had a great presentation on earlier today. Our fork, what we put in our mouths. And again, you guys are all at Veg Fest here, so I think of all the crowds, you really get the diet part. And then not smoking, right? So feet, fork, fingers using your hands to smoke a cigarette. So not smoking, doing those. And honestly, just doing those 3, even if we would just leave it at that gets you about 80% of the way. And this is not just in the United States, but this is 80% of preventing chronic disease globally. So the same study has been done in Potsdam, Germany, and again in Sweden, looking at heart attacks. But basically, if you can optimize what you do with your physical activity, what you put in your mouth, maintaining a healthy weight, and not smoking, this takes you a long way in terms of preventing chronic disease. and also keeping you healthy as long as possible. And I think the other 3 domains, because I said there were 6, the last 3 are sleep, stress, and love. So you have your big 6 is your feet, fork, fingers, and your last 3 is sleep, stress, and love. I think we all intuitively understand sleep. That's getting adequate, restorative sleep, probably on average about 8 hours a night. Stress, I think, is probably one of the silent killers that we don't really appreciate how profound its effects are. But certainly having ways to cope, manage, and deal with stress. And then lastly, this love one, which actually encompasses a lot. So this is not only love of yourself, this is the relationships and the people in your life, but also having a purpose and or a higher being if you so desire. So really doing all of these 6 things are certainly the truest way to not only the longest and healthiest life, but probably the happiest and most enjoyable too. And this is one of my favorite quotes from one of my mentors, David Katz, because lifestyle medicine at the end of the day, health is important, but health is just a tool that allows us to do the things that we want to do with our life. This is not just making sure that we live longer so that you can outlive everyone that you know and love, but it's really making sure that the years that you add to your life are quality years that you actually get to enjoy. And so sort of transitioning from this idea of lifestyle medicine and recognizing that health is a priority and should be something that we value and is important to us, how do we actually translate from knowing this information, because I think we all know that getting exercise, getting enough sleep, eating a healthy diet are good for us. The challenge always is translating what we know into what we routinely do. And so this is sort of the last part of this presentation, which will sort of dive down and sort of offer some opportunities and ways we can sort of think about how to incorporate these things. And so just a brief overview of these next little 3 sections I'm going to cover. I'm going to start sort of broadly with a perspective and some contextual ways to think about our priorities. And then I'm going to introduce you to this concept of annual forecasting. And then we'll sort of end with sort of the more granular approach of actually scheduling it on a day-to-day basis. So I found this from a podcast that I was listening to, and I really love this idea. So many of the things that we do in our life, certainly as we're growing up as an adult, getting into a profession, a job, we do so many things to put lines on our resume of working at X, being in a certain position, wanting to get further, wanting to progress. And for people in professions, this could be, volunteering for a PTO meeting or a housing organization, or even writing a paper, joining a committee, a task force. The things are endless. But the concept they introduced was how many things that we do in our life are focused on building a resume versus building a eulogy that we would be happy about. And when you sort of think about that a little bit, you say, the things that I've spent a lot of time and invested a lot of, my resources into have been things to do sort of this resume thing, but how many have really focused on being the sort of person that I want to be remembered for? And so I love this idea, but it's not necessarily something practical that you can do on a day-to-day basis, because you're going to make a decision today or this afternoon or tomorrow, and you're not going to say, is this a resume building thing or is this a eulogy building decision? But that's where I think this idea of annual forecasting can come in to give you a little bit better guidance on how you can sort of make sure that you're prioritizing things that are important to you. And basically what it is 3 domains in your life. So you have a career, you have yourself, and you have relationships. Each of these essentially can comprise most of the things you do in life. And so the annual forecasting idea is to think about 1 year from now, pick 1 or 2 goals in each of these domains that would make you a better person or make you happier with how you spent your time. And I think the great way to think about it is, since it's February right now, to look ahead towards December of this year, 2019, and when you go to write your Christmas card or send your Christmas email to your family, to your friends, what do you want 2019 to have been remembered for that you did, that you were proud of, or that you're happy about? And so by picking one of these things in each domain, you can sort of draft, in essence, what you want to be able to write, and then you can work backwards to make sure that you accomplish the things along the way to make sure you get there. So to go through those simple domains, I think career is probably one of the most easily grasped, because it's something that we always have on our plate and something that we are always working towards. And so the career can consist of any of the things. I've listed a few up there. It could be as simple as a promotion, switching jobs, going back to school, or even dedicating to actually working less. I think these are all admirable things that you can sort of think about as what you would want to say at the end of the year. But pick one and then go with it. Same thing with self. And again, I think the self is where you really have the most opportunity to really improve your health and well-being. And again, it can be in any domain. You can pick 1, you can pick 2, you can pick 3, whatever makes you happy. but I think focusing on one of those 6 domains of lifestyle medicine, I think will do a tremendous amount for your health. And if you can focus on one of those each year, pretty soon you've hit all the domains, and even better than that, you're working on improving all of them. But the thing that I love about the self one is something that I've totally done, and I think most people that I've spoken with have done too. And how many times do we use that decision of, oh, I'd love to start this own business, but it's just not the right time. I don't have the resources. I just can't do it right now. Or I'd love to go through and reorganize all those family photos, whatever it might be. This is always the when I have more time. And I think one of the coolest things to think about is right now you literally have the most time left on this earth that you will ever have. So you have more time now than you'll ever have again. So if this is your excuse, you're never going to have any more time than you have right now. And as that sort of Nike sort of quote illustrates, we are very good at saying, I'll take care of that tomorrow. But when it becomes tomorrow and tomorrow never comes, it ends up being something that never ends up happening. And lastly, I think this is the more challenging one, certainly for me, and perhaps some of you as well. It's easy to prioritize your career because everybody sort of views that in our society as something that we should aspire to and take very seriously. It's much more difficult to make sure that we are actually prioritizing the things that most people would actually say are the most important things when we get to the end of our life. And that's the relationships we had and the people that we care about. And again, these don't need to be profound, dramatic things. They can be something very simple. Just committing yourself to calling your parents every week, just to have a conversation with them, or an old friend or acquaintance. It can be meeting somebody for a dinner or a lunch or coffee, whatever it might be. But the idea is purposefully choosing something that you think that you could benefit from and then making it a habit across the year. And so the way this sort of exercise would go, and this is something you can do when you get home later, in a few weeks after you've thought about it, whenever, but basically pick a goal in each of those areas. Again, the career, self, and your relationships. And then once you pick a goal, find a few milestones that you can sort of accomplish across the year, and then make it so that those milestones, if you meet each milestone, you're basically ensuring that you're going to get to your goal in the end. And so what this could look like, let's say we pick the self category, for example. And again, being my background in exercise, I gravitated to, well, let's do a 5K, right? Some of us have never done a 5K. Maybe we've talked about it. Maybe we've done a 5K and we want to do a 10K. But either way, the first milestone is essentially finding a race, signing up for it. Milestone 2, all of a sudden you say, I'm going to work up to walking 30 minutes 3 times a week. Milestone 3, work into intermittently jogging with your walk 3 times a week, right? And so you can build out these old milestones for yourselves. The goal should be very personable. The milestone should be very realistic and achievable for you. Basically, the timeline sort of includes so that if I accomplish milestone 1, milestone 2, milestone 3, I'll get to whatever the actual goal is by the end of the year. And so that's also a great way to think about things, but I think still we run into the challenge of what do I do on a day-to-day basis, right? So I've decided I want to run a 5K at the end of the year. Well, tomorrow when I get up, what do I do? What's going to change in my life that's going to help me get there? And that's where I like this idea of scheduling. What we schedule tends to take priority in our lives. And you can just think about your own organizer, your own planner, the things that you have on your calendar, per se. You have events with school, with family, with work, whatever it might be, appointments, getting your hair cut, taking your kids to a sporting game, etc. The things that you have scheduled, you tend to show up and do. I see this all the time with people who commit to exercising and hire a personal trainer. They are incredibly good at showing up when you're paying a trainer, $50, $60, $100 an hour to train them. They almost never miss a session. All of a sudden you remove the trainer, you remove some of that accountability, and all of a sudden it's way more difficult for them to get to the gym, right? So by writing this down, and even more appropriately, penciling it into your schedule, or even with a pen, better because then you can't erase it, putting some of these health behaviors into your schedule, you can sort of ensure that you are going to accomplish at least some of them, right? And so the example I have up here is literally a day. I made a whole weekly schedule in the Lifestyle Medicine Handbook, and it basically takes all of the evidence we have for healthy behaviors that can help prevent, treat, and reverse disease, and has put them in a weekly schedule. So it's basically a checklist of, if I follow this schedule, I'll make sure that I'm basically optimizing all the lifestyle medicine behaviors I can to get the best health that I'm able to. And so for Wednesday, for example, there's 5 boxes on here, which that sounds like a lot, But let's start at the top, right? So the first one is literally sleeping, right? So I think probably everyone slept the night before. Now I made it a little bit more difficult saying 7 to 9 hours of sleep. But again, something you can do is as soon as you wake up in the morning, you can check that box, right? The other one that's relatively, I think, straightforward is eating 2 fruits and 3 vegetables, right? And I think most of us here at VegFest probably can get close to that on most days of the week, right? So those are almost 2 freebies. Okay, and so then I have 3 other ones on there. And again, Wednesday happens to be not terrible, but it's going for a 15-minute walk at lunch while you're at work or even at home, whatever. Having dinner with your family, which you're gonna eat dinner any night anyway, but really focusing on connecting with other people. And then lastly, before you go to bed, doing a gratitude exercise of writing 3 good things that happened to you that day and sort of reflecting on the positive aspects of your life to sort of help reduce your stress, anxiety, etc. Just doing this little calendar here has hit all of the lifestyle medicine domains. Obviously includes not smoking, but by and large, I think that's a very manageable, achievable sort of schedule that you could fit into your Wednesdays. Now, if we make it a little bit more challenging, we can put that across the whole week, right? And so not every day is the same, but some days we have more time to spend on things than others. So for example, the weekends, I put 45 minutes of cardiovascular activity or lifting weights to try and fit all those other behaviors in. The point is, you don't need to do this schedule, but it gives you an idea of how you could structure your own life to choose things that are meaningful and important to you, and then make sure that you're accountable for actually following through with them. And so the last sort of piece here is then I've given you a weekly schedule. Now I'm going to give you sort of some tips and tricks that you can use on a minute-to-minute basis. Because the challenge with a lot of this stuff is not that we don't know what is important to us, and it's not even that we can't always spend the time on it, it's because we are inundated with multiple requests for our time for something else, right? And so how many times has someone come up to you and said, hey, can you help me with X or Y, or, I think you'd be a really good person to come to the PTO meetings on Wednesday nights, or how'd you like to be a part of the homeowners association in your neighborhood? We only meet once a month on Fridays, we think it'd be great. We always have opportunities we always have others asking for our time to do things. And so one of the most important things you can probably take away from this is being very cognizant of what you agree to do. And so some of these tips are really what you can do on a daily basis. And this is easily my favorite, and it certainly has changed my life in many ways because I'm 100% guilty of being a people pleaser, saying, I would love to help with that. Yeah, I'm sure. I'll do whatever I can. Because you want to help that person. You want to be a good friend, a good colleague, a good whatever. But then you realize down the road that you have committed to all these things that maybe you're actually not that excited about and maybe aren't that important to you. And I think the important thing to realize is every single time that you say yes to something means you are saying no to something else. You may not know what the something else is, but if you say, hey, I'm happy to be a part of the PTO meeting on Wednesday nights, all of a sudden, whatever was going to take place that Wednesday night, whether that was watching TV with your partner, whether that was going for a walk in the neighborhood, or even going to the gym, you have automatically now said no to those things, even though you didn't speak no or even have the chance to make the choice. It was because you agreed to it. Uh-oh. We lost our slide. So anyway, so that was choice number 1, is saying, let me check my calendar. So before you decide that there's something you are going to commit to that's going to involve any amount of time, it is a perfect way and perfectly acceptable to say, let me look and see what else I've got going on. It might be the situation where, hey, I don't have anything else that's more important than that. I'd love to help out with that. Perfect opportunity. But at least it gives you the moment where you can pause, reflect, and actually think about how important this activity is to you in your life. The second one that I don't have up there is inevitably you're going to have to respond to people, right? You can't just say, let me check my calendar and never get back to them. I don't think that's a good way to go about removing things you're not interested in doing. But you do need to respond with either a positive or a negative. And I think anytime you use the no, I always follow it with no, but. So maybe it's, no, I can't go to the movie with you on Friday night, but I'd love to get coffee with you Saturday morning. So you've not said I don't want to spend time with you and you're not important to me, but you've also said that I have other things that on Friday night that are in fact more important than going to see a movie. And so it gives you the flexibility to not only still please them, but also to get your schedule so that you are accomplishing the things that are important to you. The third one is good for the professional work life, but also for anything that people ask for favors of. Can I borrow your truck? Can I have, can you help me put together this presentation, or can you volunteer with me at this organization? And sometimes, quite frankly, you can't, right? And so whenever something comes up as an invitation to you, you can say, hey, I'd love to speak at the Southwest Veg Fest, but my schedule's really full. I think Dr. So-and-so would be a really good person to fit with your Veg Fest. And what this does is it still helps the person out. Although I'd love to think that my help is completely unique and that no one else can do what I can do, the fact is, if we can help somebody, they're really just interested in the help and filling whatever void or hole that is. So if we can find somebody else who can help them, they will probably be almost equally as happy, despite it not being ourselves who are doing the helping. The last one on the list I think is really good for work, but it can still pertain to life itself. And this is, again, a recognition that you have a finite amount of time and you already have probably innumerable things on your to-do list. So anytime somebody asks you to do something, and again, I don't really like the word deprioritize, but again, so using the case of a boss, say, hey, I'm working on project A and project B. This project C sounds really exciting and really interesting. I'd love to put my full effort and time into it. I'm working on project A and B. I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to put my full time into project C. Which one would you like me to prioritize first? Because all of a sudden now you have put it on the other person, whether that's a boss, a spouse, a friend, whomever, but then they recognize that you have a finite amount of time that you can allocate to doing these things. You let them decide what is the most important thing, and then you dedicate your time, so all of a sudden you aren't stressed and worried that you're not going to accomplish everything. You have clear direction of what they care about, and then you can follow through doing it yourself. So I've sort of gone through a lot of things relatively quickly here, but just to briefly sort of summarize. So first we introduced this concept of time, and I sort of broke it down of this idea of saying, every week you have 168 hours, and you get to choose what you do with those hours, right? And then we went quickly on into this concept of being busy, and with the recognition that all of us are busy. We all have things to do, but I think using that phrase of I'm too busy for something is just an easy way out of anything that we don't feel like doing. And I think if we can replace that sort of thought in our head with it's just not a high enough priority right now, it helps us better weigh and evaluate what that activity is and how important it might be. Then lastly, we sort of talked through this idea of priorities, health, and sort of how to think about what is important to you and then how to implement it in your own life, whether that's starting with this idea of am I living for a resume or am I living for a eulogy? And then sort of map out a year with this annual forecasting thing, pick the 3 domains, your career, yourself, and then also your relationships, and then follow through with those milestones throughout the year to sort of make sure that you follow through with whatever it is your goal is. And then lastly, we sort of broke it down into then not only this milestone thing, but then even the simple opportunity of putting this into your schedule, whether that's a weekly schedule, a monthly schedule, whatever it might be, make it a recurring event in your Outlook calendar or on your iPhone. And then also just sort of these day-to-day tips of how you can sort of make sure that when people ask you for your time, that you're investing it in the way that is most important to you. So with that, I sort of started with this idea of this busy illusion. The illusion of being busy is that we are all busy and that life comes with a literally never-ending to-do list, right? And while this is a visual illusion that I've shown you here with these 2 orange dots being the same size, I think perhaps a better way to think about them is that you can either choose to be one of these 2 orange circles, right? You can be the one on the left where you have lots of things that you have agreed to do and that you are investing your time in. Obviously, your time is finite, so you only have so many black dots or black space that you can use. And so you can either choose to do lots of things that maybe aren't as important to you, or you can be the guy on the right that says, these are the things that I value and really are the things that are most important to me. It's very clear where I spend my time, and if you have a question about whether or not I'm interested in doing something, it's very, very clear what I will sort of prioritize over something else. And so with that, I think I'll end up sort of concluding here, but I think this idea of being busy is something we too often use as a badge of honor or something else. And if we really get down to it, we have all the time that we need. We just need to make sure that we prioritize the things that are most important to us into the time that we have. So with that, thank you all. And I don't know if we're actually going to have any time for questions, but I think we do not have time for questions. So I will conclude with that. I'll take questions on the side if anybody has anything. But thank you all for your attention.